Good afternoon. My name is Ray DeMonico. I'm the Director of Educational Policy at the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research. Thank you for joining us here today at this Manhattan Institute-sponsored event on school choice in Arizona and implications for other states. This event is co-sponsored by your Goldwater Institute, and we're very grateful for the support that they've given on the ground, helping get this together with us and line up the speakers and such. So we hope you enjoy the program. Why have we come from New York to Arizona? You have we handed out copies of our president's report. We are a multi-issue organization. We believe in the future of cities. We believe in safe streets. That makes us an ultra-conservative organization these days. Local journalists called us that, talking about this event. But we thought we won that battle in the 1990s before Mayor Giuliani came to town. New York City was the crime capital of the world and the murder capital of the United States. And following programs and policies, broken windows theories and stuff that Manhattan Institute scholars have been pushing, the city became safe in a period of 8 years. And unfortunately, in the last 10 years, under a sort of neo-socialist mayor and, elected district attorneys, it's gone the other way. So we have a lot more work to do on that regard. But school choice has always been at the heart of our efforts in education. Okay? We believe in school choice in all of its forms, and we believe that the educational system works best when families are given the option to choose amongst well-performing traditional public schools, charter schools, private and religious schools. And when each of these types of schools are recognized for the very real public benefits that they provide to our society and to the private benefits that they provide to the students who attend them. We reject the notion that choice policies drain public dollars from traditional public schools. And we believe it's important to make clear that parents have a right to choose schools that respect their values and their educational priorities. We believe in educational pluralism in that regard. Finally, we believe that states and localities are the proper venue for sorting out these complex issues. Later, a panel of experts will talk about issues related to the design and implementation of effective choice programs. But now, Matt Beinenberg and I, Matt is from the Goldwater Institute, will be interviewing your former governor, Ducey, to gain his insights as someone who won the battle to give parents true choice of schools. So please join me in welcoming Governor Ducey.
All right, well, thank you all very much for coming. As you mentioned, my name is Matt Beinberg. I'm the Director of Education Policy here at the Goldwater Institute. And it really is a pleasure to be seated with the former governor, Governor Ducey. Thank you for all that you did. You had the privilege or the honor of signing the nation's first fully universal ESA program, a massive victory, and we can chat a little bit more about that and how that process played out. Be curious if you can provide a little thoughts in terms of what can states do as they're looking to provide models of school choice. What can they do to promote new schools opening, new experimentation with school choice, whether that's with the legislation itself or other efforts? How do we continue moving this forward?
Well, the first thing other governors can do to expand school choice and to bring Arizona's ideas to their state is to ignore the teachers union and ignore the media. Those are the biggest obstacles to bringing real innovation at the state level, and I want to thank the Goldwater Institute and the Manhattan Institute for what they're doing at the state and national level on this. What education spending is to the state level is what defense spending is on the national level. I mean, this is every governor's #1 spending item in their budget. And if you get this right, it opens up the door for real renewal inside our nation, for certainly real reform in K-12 education. I'm incredibly proud that Arizona is leading the way on this. I think of it in many ways for those of you that are my age or older. No one ever thought the 4-minute mile could ever be broken. And then a gentleman named Roger Bannister did it. and now thousands run less than a 4-minute mile. No one thought that universal ESAs could actually happen. But COVID changed everything. It's given us a real silver lining, and this should be the #1 issue in every state to renew our nation. 8 states have now ESAs since Arizona did it. It should be all 50 states because really, although we had no help from any Democrats, we had a broad coalition of African American pastors, the Black Mothers Forum, Hispanic religious folks, that many were registered Democrat. And it was only out of fear of the teachers union that no one in the Democratic caucus did this. So this is something that happened in Arizona. Arizona has led the way. There's work to be done. We want to make sure that this is successful for the nearly 100,000 families that are predicted to be on this program by 2024. But we did the hard work, and now we need to do the necessary work.
When you were thinking about pulling this program together and designing it the way that you did, what were your thoughts about the need to stimulate the creation of new and different types of schools? Markets work best when there are new entrants doing things that other people hadn't imagined. And so I wonder if you could say a little about that.
So you and I both are schooled in that thought, and we know how it works in our nation. We see our free enterprise system and this material prosperity and innovation that we have in every section of our country, except for education and healthcare, where the commanding height is the government. And anybody that's been to the doctor recently knows what a frustration it is in terms of how we provide services here. And we had the same thing going on in K-12 education. So I think a lot of people are nostalgic for the neighborhood school that they grew up in yesteryear, and there are a lot of fond memories around that. Yet the country has changed dramatically. Educational achievement has absolutely flatlined since the 1980s. And Arizona started small in 1994 with leaders like Governor Fife Symington and Superintendent of Public Instruction Lisa Graham Keegan, who put some of the nation's first charter schools here. And I know we have the headmaster from Great Hearts here, and I've often said in public, if Jack, Joe, and Sam Ducey were in kindergarten, they would be going to a Great Hearts school. This is a charter school. We all know that that's a public school open to all, but it has private management in terms of how they run it. And they've done an excellent job here. We've got the BASIS system and so many other great examples, but it's that healthy competition among these schools. And I think at least last time I checked, Headmaster, there was 11,000 kid wait list at what is the most rigorous education in the country. So parents actually are very good consumers, and they know when their child is not being challenged, they know when their child is not engaged, and that's not happening in so many of Arizona's excellent schools. And ESAs really bring the next level of innovation because, sure, we've got all these great Catholic schools and Hebrew schools and religious schools and private schools, but it's the flowers that have not yet bloomed that I think will really change and renew K-12 education.
You touched on this in your last comment here about COVID, changing things. And Arizona, we pioneered the first education savings account program back in 2011, 2012. And for about 10 years, a couple fits and starts in some other states that picked it up, and yet it wasn't until these last couple of years that now we're seeing, as you said, tons of states across the country. Can you touch on, what is it that you see that really changed that, right? We talked a lot about test scores, we talked about things that led to school choice, but this new movement that we've seen, the spread of parents' rights, the things during COVID, what do you see as those different dimensions that really compounded and said, we have to make a change now?
Milton Friedman said that in a crisis, people look for the ideas that are lying around. And we had been selling, this animated my run for governor to get the income tax as close to zero as possible and universal school choice. I thought it was the only answer that we really had to K-12 education. The other side always says it's more money, more money, more money, and that's for the children. And that had worked for them to get more money, but it wasn't doing anything for our kids, and it wasn't doing anything for our schools. So we wanted this to happen. And I'll take you on a little journey, not that far back, But if you remember in 2017, we actually signed the ESA bill back then. That was only for 5,000 kids a year for the next 6 years. But it would have given us 30,000 children with ESAs. They referred that to the ballot. They took that to the people in 2018. And ESAs were so misunderstood. We got beat 65-35. The public rejected ESAs. Then COVID came. And they shut down the schools. And they would not reopen even when they were encouraged to reopen. And that was the first time we were able to introduce this school choice to everyone, because we took some of the too much in excess dollars that were sent from Joe Biden's administration, and we said, if you don't like where your child's going to school or your school won't reopen, you can have $7,500 to put your child in the school of their choice. And this was broadly popular. And I think it had a lot of people thinking, why is the kid across the street that's at a charter school or a Catholic school going to school, but my kid's at Madison Meadows or in the Phoenix Union District or the Mesa District, and it's still shut down? So when we passed it in the legislature, and this was no easy feat. It took all 8 years to get this done. It took a worldwide pandemic, and it took a lot of persuasion. But that idea was lying around. We had softened the ground for acceptance of this idea. The same group that beat us by 65 points couldn't even get this on the ballot. ESAs are here to stay. Now, there are some threats out there, and I think we need to be aware of that. But by 2024, you'll have 100,000 families that are using ESAs to go to the school of their choice. I think it provides an opportunity to the Republican Party to be the parents' party and to really talk about an issue that every family, every mom and dad and grandfather and grandmother care about. And when's the last time you saw a government take anything away from a citizen? So I think that we have a lot to be hopeful for here, but I still think we should protect that, and I think we can talk that as we go forward.
I'm thinking that your comments about what changed since 2017, 18, and COVID was a big part of it, but you're still up against, at that point, a powerful, organized opposition whose funding comes from the public salaries and through the teachers' dues and whatnot. I'm guessing there had to be a pretty strong ground game here to organize this multiracial coalition behind school choice. And who were the champions of that?
So I want to give the first shout out to, is Jenny Clark in the room? So this is the power of moms. Jenny Clark is one of the heroes of this movement. Stand up, Jenny. Give Jenny Clark a hand. One of the best meetings that I ever had in the governor's office was in 2021 when I had 9 black African-American pastors come see me and wanted to lobby on behalf of this. And I asked how many around the table were Republicans, and not one hand went up. Yet they were all in on this. And this is when I knew that this is a game-changing idea. Not only is it the right thing to do for our kids, this is a way for us to win great majorities, not only in Arizona, but across the country. And I'm telling you, when you're talking on school choice, you can go in any room in the country except the teachers' union room. I mean, parents want to hear about this. They want to understand it. In Arizona, we had a little bit of a head start because we had charters that we could point to, but the African-American pastors. And then I would give the MVP of the Year award to Janelle Wood. Janelle was the leader of the Black Mothers Forum. And she came to visit me when I called out the National Guard and put a curfew on during the George Floyd riots. Janelle wasn't happy about that. The young people and the moms in her organization were angry. And I said, well, Janelle, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. But we did strike up a relationship there, and she wanted to find something that we had common ground on, and we found it in education. And in my last State of the State, she was seated in the front row next to the First Lady. And I said from the podium, that 50 years ago, politicians stood in the schoolhouse door and wouldn't let minorities in. Today, union-backed politicians stand in the schoolhouse door and won't let minorities out. It's time to set these families free. These kids are trapped in failing public schools. Janelle Wood led the standing ovation. It gave the legislature the courage they needed to vote against the teachers union, and today we have universal ESAs in Arizona.
So you just alluded to kids being trapped in failing schools. You mentioned earlier that to the left the solution is always we'll just throw more money at the problem. That's all that they need. And you've actually taken criticism from the left. We hear all the time, well, ESA is school choice. This is going to bankrupt our public schools. And you're somebody who back in the 20 by 20 plan, you had supported and helped spearhead massive teacher pay increases. And yet we still see from the left them saying you're an enemy of education, and yet your administration and the folks like Representative Toma, where you guys came together and did these things, what we saw were expansions of school choice at the same time additional resources going to the traditional public school system, and it still seemed to the left that was a bad deal. I don't know if you can talk about that. It seemed like you're trying to say let's fund everything.
Think about this. When's the last time you heard the left complaining about spending? But all of a sudden they're up in arms because there's too much spending and this costs too much. This is all baloney, all right? It's about $1 billion to educate 54,000 kids in the Mesa School District. At 100,000 children in ESAs, that's going to be $900 million. So we're educating these kids at less than half the cost. In addition, it's their money, and it's their parents' right to use that money in which to educate them. And I also want to, if we could expand the MVPs to people that were in the legislature and did have the courage to take a very difficult vote, because believe me, the teachers union does have influence at the state level. And Ben Toma was the leader in our House of Representatives, and he was backed up by Rusty Bowers, and Karen Fann was able to keep everyone together in the Senate. But they're going to continue to beat on this, on the spending side of it, and all that means is that it's immensely popular, that more parents want to use this program. And like I said, that's their money. They can go to the school of choice. That builds the coalition to make this successful. It will be important to make certain that we get through the 2024 cycle, although we have been seen as a red state that has had some real blips over the last couple election cycles. In 2018, somebody who was recognized as a national conservative, we won this state by 14 points. I still believe that's where the state is today if we're presenting our ideas properly and talking about the policies. It's a very tribal political time. Republicans vote Republican, Democrats vote Democrat. To win these offices, you must win the independents. And to make the case about school choice and what's in it for their child is a winning message all day long, all over this state and everywhere in this country. So I think you're going to continue to hear this. I think you need to look to leaders like Kimberly Yee in the Treasurer's Office and Tom Horn as Superintendent of Public Instruction to make sure we've got the proper safeguards on the program. Because whenever you have this amount of money going out, you will have some mistakes that are made by parents. But there are mistakes made in every school system. It's just when it happens at the Scottsdale level, they never talk about the chief financial officer that embezzled all the money. So we need to make certain that these parents are doing to the best of their ability what's right for their children. And when we see any waste, fraud, or abuse, we should call it out immediately.
I think it's important in this argument, too, to constantly make the point, something I learned that I didn't know, this $900 million number that's out there, that, as you say, is not a true cost because you're educating these kids at less than what the public schools spend. Funding of traditional public schools under your administration increased by multiples of that amount. And it didn't produce the results that people hoped for. But this is a drop in the bucket, the $900 million.
It's a drop in the bucket. I mean, $900 million is real money, but you point out some things about what good policy is across the board. And when you look to places like the Manhattan Institute and the Goldwater Institute, in 2014, we had a $1 billion deficit, and our economy was flat on its back. We were known for construction and call centers. We made a commitment to balance the budget every year, and we made very difficult decisions in that first year to get the budget balanced. Then we began to grow the economy. We cut or simplified taxes every year. Every year we cut taxes, we got more taxpayers. So we were in a position where we could cut taxes every year, balance a $1 billion deficit, invest, get a 20% pay raise to teachers, and put multiples of more dollars into K-12 education while leaving the state with over $5 billion surplus. This is a winning roadmap. It's being recreated in states like Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Nebraska, and Indiana. It can be done anywhere, so we should continue to advocate for this full spectrum conservative onslaught of what provides peace and prosperity and quality of life for the citizens of Arizona. So I think that you bring up a very good point there, and I think we also need to look to our legislature. I think if we can do this, now remember, whenever you're celebrating in politics, what you're not thinking about is the equal and opposite reaction that's coming your way. We have a lot to celebrate over these last 8 years, but the left never sleeps. There's a reason they say there are no lost causes. It's because there are no gained causes. This is a battle that has been going on for 250 years, but we have just hit the left in the solar plexus at the state level like they have never been hit before, ever, anywhere. So they are going to be coming back. We need to find a way to protect ESAs, to keep our majorities in our House and our Senate, but we do have them really over a barrel because every time they come in each session, what do they say? We need more money for education. Well, now when they say we need more money for education, we can say we have more money for education, and that includes ESAs. And as we continue to get that ESA level dollars back to the parent, it's almost like a backdoor tax cut to the parent that gives them more freedom to send their child to the school that they want. And it's a way to shrink our government, provide better services, and actually focus on the child. And we will find ways where we're doing a better job attracting, retaining, and rewarding great teachers.
Thank you. We're at the end of our time now. That was a very compelling story. You've accomplished a great deal here, and you've created a model for other states to follow. That's why we came here to celebrate this great victory of yours. But we also heed your advice that you have to be constantly vigilant because the attacks will come. So thank you so much for joining us today, Governor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Good to meet you.
Thanks so much, Matt.
That was fantastic. Hopefully our mics are on. Wow, I'm really sad that Governor Ducey is not still in office. That was, oh man. He is a man of great optimism and hope and did so much for the state, particularly children and families. And we're going to spend the next little bit of time to kind of unpack a little bit what he said and drill down on some of the questions and points that he made. So obviously I'm going to go to my far left and then move closest to me, but you guys got to meet Matt Beinberg. He's the Education Policy Director at the Goldwater Institute. The idea of ESAs was incubated and started there, and we are so grateful that we had that seed over 12 years ago that is now set literally our country on fire. It's pretty amazing. And then I have, to his right, I have Dr. Toyin Atalagbe. Yes. She just stepped down as headmaster of one of our amazing Great Heart schools and assumes a new role immediately as the leader of Great Hearts Christos, which is a new model of Christian schools that will be opening starting this fall, and we'll be able to have a conversation about that. And then last but not least, we have Nicole Garnett, who is a senior fellow with the Manhattan Institute, a frequent writer of the City Journal, which is their main periodical, and then is also the John P. Murphy Foundation Professor of Law at Notre Dame. There's a lot of words. But our hope is really to spend a little bit of time of talking about implementation, what actually happened over this last year, and I'll just sort of grill my colleagues up here and sort of ask each one different questions to kind of get you all engaged. Just a few things. Governor Ducey made a few references to charter schools. Everyone knows what a charter school is. Maybe a public school that's independently operated with a lot of flexibility. We know what our neighborhood schools are, correct? And we know what ESAs are, empowerment scholarships. It's funds that go to a family. It's directed from the Department of Treasury, and then we have some guardrails and parameters of how families get to use those funds, whether it's to pay tuition or it's to curate a child's education sort of in a homeschool context or home educating context. And then we also have a tax credit scholarship program here in Arizona. But we have over 1.1 million students here in Arizona. 240,000 students go to charter schools. About 40,000 kids use tax credit scholarships, but they can stack those up. But what's absolutely amazing, and Jenny and I get to serve on the State Board of Education together, we were looking in August, around 11,000 students were using ESAs. Today, it's 58,000 and growing. Literally, like every week, there's another 3,000 kids that have signed up. It's really phenomenal. So after that long introduction, Matt, like you are our policy guru up here. I would love for you to unpack, just from your vantage point of looking at the program a year ago to where we are today, what's working from your vantage point, and perhaps what could we maybe do better, because lots of states are copying us.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for hosting, and again, thank you all for being here. Just echoing the governor's comments, I mean, I think the starting point is just to recognize what a huge victory this has been. I mean, Arizona has been a leader in school choice for years, and it just completely moved the goalpost and created a new standard that now we're seeing replicated across the country. And so I think just to take that in and recognize where we were 18 months ago versus today, the governor mentioned the referendum against ESAs a few years ago, and that was something where even proponents of ESAs and school choice said this was going to put a cap on the number of students who could get in that program, and so that didn't end up passing. And now this new legislation that passed, and every student in the entire state is eligible for it. As you said, before this happened, we had hardly 10,000 students on the program, and these were kids, with special needs. These were kids from military families, from the foster care system, and now we have almost 60,000 students, and it's projected to grow thousands more. And so I think just looking at where we were and where we are, and I think one of the things that's important, we are going to, as the governor said, continue to see attacks against this program, against parents, against school choice. And yet we've actually already seen the left give ground. And so what we're hearing now, right, we're hearing all these complaints about this ESA program is unaccountable, it's going to bankrupt the state, it's terrible for all these reasons. And yet even the groups who are opposed to ESAs now say, well, we actually liked the ESA program before. We liked what it was doing before. When rewind 3 or 4 years, and they hated it, right? They said this program is terrible, it's siphoning funds away. Now suddenly they recognize that, well, for those 10,000 kids from military families, special needs community, the foster care system, they're saying, well, let's just go back to that. So even they who have been opposed to this tooth and nail are now recognizing that this constituency who has served so well for years, even they wouldn't dream of pulling this away from them, right? And so now we have these tens of thousands more families who have gotten onto the program, and we're still hearing the same arguments against it, but we're now seeing all these families who have opportunity. And so I think the boom in enrollment has been an extraordinary success of the program, and obviously as the program has gone up, there have been, and we can kind of get into some of the particulars of this, right? Obviously there's implementation questions and policy, and I know folks here who've been involved in trying to, a brand new program, right? This is now a program that's serving a large percentage of students in Arizona, and to stand that up, right? The public schools have been going for decades, right? We have decades of history with the public school system where kids are in failing schools still, right? And yet then the left comes in and says, well, we can find an example of something that went wrong or didn't go according to plan with charter schools or ESAs and pounce on it, when I think the success of this program and of charter schools as recent innovations is showing that, yeah, there's going to be kinks and there's going to be challenges, but this is something that we have blazed a new trail, and I think it's incredibly exciting and satisfying.
I love that. So going back a little bit to what Governor Ducey said, he alluded to a report that came out last Wednesday. Arizona Department of Education, they released a report. They said, we estimate by the end of June next year, 2024, going into the school year 2024, that 100,000 kids will be there, that it will cost $900 million. Others, you guys wrote a compelling sort of rebuttal that sort of is like, well, like, it's not exactly $900 million. And oh, by the way, for every dollar you spend in ESA, you're sort of spending $1.5 for the traditional public. Could you just help the audience understand that it's not necessarily an apples to apples, and not all kids get, say, 7,000 or 10,000, that there is some differentiation based on the student population that receives an ESA, and how maybe that's not accurate, or maybe it is?
Yeah. So all these numbers, they get huge, right? Especially in the age of COVID, we talk about trillions and billions like it's monopoly money, right? And at the end of the day, I think it's helpful to kind of bring this down to numbers that people can kind of just grasp, right? And so the ESA program gives to a typical student about $7,000 a year. The average per pupil spending for Arizona school districts is about $14,000 per student. So let that sink in, right? That's more than full sticker price of tuition at Arizona State University, right? That's what's being spent on our public school K-12 students right now. So $14,000 over here on average for the traditional public school system versus $7,000 for an ESA. So when they throw around big numbers like $900 million, what they're talking about is if you have 100,000 students, right, and a lot of these in the ESA program are kids with very significant special needs, right? So these are kids who generate a lot more funding per student, and they do that in the public school system as well, right? These are kids who they may get $20,000, $30,000 of funding toward them if they have, significant disabilities, whether they're in the public school system or the ESA, and the left turns around and says, look how costly that is, look how terrible that is, we got to shut down this program. But if we had given the money over to the traditional public school system, they'd say, great, now give us even more, right? And so they try to throw out these numbers to scare it, and when they say $900 million, that's not the marginal cost, meaning that's not a new cost to the state. That's the total price of if the estimates get that high. And again, there are other estimates from the legislature that say, no, we're expecting it to be closer to 70,000 by next year. But even on these higher estimates, it's to say, you guys aren't talking about what's the actual impact to the state. It's not $900 million of new costs to the state.
Right.
If those kids were all in public schools, it would be $1.5 billion to educate those kids.
Right. I love that. So I want to involve some of you, the rest of you. So Nicole, you're a scholar. You're a legal scholar. You write prolifically. I would love, you have a forthcoming paper with a friend of mine, Mike McShane, I believe. He writes for Governor Ducey referenced Milton Friedman. He works for a think tank that sort of espouses the philosophy of Milton Friedman on specifically education issues. I would love for you to just give an assessment as you're watching all of these wildflowers bloom across the country. How are you thinking of sort of the right way to implement?
Yeah, there are a lot of minds thinking about this. All eyes are on Arizona, and I don't want to speak too much to what's going on in Arizona because you've been doing this longer than anyone else. And as the governor pointed out, you're in the vanguard, and people are watching. The torch, you've been carrying the Olympic torch as other states have followed. So we've gone really from having last year 2 programs that were universal or near universal to now, depending on how you count-ish, 7 or 8 states with universal or near universal education savings accounts programs. And many of those states don't really have any experience with parental choice at all.
Right.
Arkansas, for example, Iowa, Utah. South Dakota, Utah. So a lot of learning is everyone's looking at Arizona and seeing, unfortunately, what you're doing right, but also, unfortunately, what the hiccups along the way. I think there's also a bigger picture to think about. So I've been involved in the parental choice movement since I really graduated from law school in the mid-90s, when I was helping defend voucher programs, there were about 1,000 kids in the United States in private school choice. 500 of them were in Wisconsin and 500 of them were in Ohio. And if you think about you are going to have 100,000 in Arizona, that's incredible. There'll be over a million kids, probably close. We're working like next year. So it's an amazing thing. And there have been a lot, it's been a great gift to a lot of families, but there have been hiccups. So I think Arizona and other states can learn from the implementation of earlier, more modest voucher programs. And I'll just say like a couple things and then open it up. The first is, I think Ray really pointed out, well, you said you went new and different schools. I would say more and better schools. And so if you look at the history of private school choice as it's unfolded incrementally over the last 30 years, you see a lot of empty seat filling and not the kind of innovation that you're seeing with Great Hearts Christos. So we want more of that. We really need to have these resources put into the hands of families that transform their lives and come up with new and innovative models of educating kids. And you see, disappointing studies that the increment. I don't care that much about test scores, but the incremental difference between going through a voucher program or not, although really, really big differences in life outcomes. So we need not only to tell the story about the transformation that this does in the lives of families, but we also need the participating schools to really, button up and take these dollars and resolve to be better, to see their own limitations, to recruit new families, especially low-income families, and to show the world that school choice works in the lives of real families. But you can't just be that we're filling empty seats and we're resting on our laurels. And I think what we're seeing in Arizona with all of the proliferation of innovation is a really good start. But it's going to be a wild ride, especially in places that have no real experience. And the last thing I'll just say is keep in mind, ESAs are very, very different than earlier models of parental choice. They're not scholarships. They're much, much more. They invite parents to customize education. And many parents, thanks to Jenny Clark and others, are learning how to do that. But most parents have no idea how to customize an education. So we have a lot of informing of parents to do as well.
Yeah. I feel like I had 3 questions in there, and then it's like which one to go. It's like a choose your own adventure. There on the issue of test scores on this, the formation, when evaluations were done on Louisiana, which had a voucher program, it was very, very restrictive on the expectations of the private schools. They're like, oh my gosh, this is a total failure. But you had to then you had private schools that were sort of contorting themselves in order to meet sort of government type expectations. Meanwhile, sort of perhaps from a test perspective, I think Patrick Wolf and others have evaluated programs in Milwaukee, and as you mentioned, the long-term life outcomes, civic engagement, success, life choices, marriage, lack of going to prison, all of those things were dramatically improved by giving individuals really a lifeline to go in another option. Some of you in this room know a colleague of mine. He says often, and I'm going to use this to get to you, Toyin, is on the supply side, is often school choice programs have been used as to plug holes in sinking ships. I actually was recently with some colleagues of Notre Dame, and they said in Arizona, our Catholic school enrollment is actually slightly up. But if you look at states like Ohio, which have very generous school choice programs also from a monetary perspective, they have lost seats. They've continued to lose ground. So from a vantage point of supply that Ray asked Governor Ducey, Toyin, I would love for you to engage. Why on earth would Great Hearts, which is a very successful charter school network that was birthed here in Arizona, it expanded to Texas, it's now in Louisiana and Florida, possibly some other states. I think I've heard some rumbling. But why on earth would Great Hearts decide we're going to do Christian schools this fall?
Well, that's a great question. Great Hearts, we are people that honestly believe in creating opportunities for children, to get a beautiful education. We are a classical school. Most of all our charter schools are classical school. And basically what classical means is that we're grounded in tradition. And what tradition? We believe alongside the Greek philosophers who were the first people to propound the philosophy of education. They said, Plato, Aristotle, that the goal of education should be to educate a child intellectually and morally. And Great Hearts, for a very long time, 20 years, we've done that. We've done that by creating an environment where children come in at a very early stage, develop habits of excellence grounded in philosophy that helps them think through exposure to a lot of content knowledge. And so what Great Hearts sets out to do now is to give parents who are asking for a Christian education, which helps develop moral virtue, not just through philosophy, but through theology as well. And that's what Great Hearts is trying to do.
So could you, I think the two schools you guys are going to launch, they're in partnership with churches in the Valley. I think it's Redemption, Alhambra, and Evident Life campuses.
That's right.
I'm imagining they're different Christian traditions in the way they worship and probably engage their members. Tell us a little bit about what's unique about those specific campuses and how are they going to come to life come September, and more specific, and then in addition, how are you going to get ESA families to come to those schools?
That's right. The first thing I'll say about the two churches, they're both Bible-believing churches. And so they're similar in that they all believe that, and they believe in that God is almighty. They believe in Jesus Christ, the Savior, and the Holy Spirit as the advocate that Jesus left behind. So they're Bible-believing churches, both of them. The difference is the location of both churches. One is in a middle-class environment in Gilbert. The other is in a lower socioeconomic class in Alhambra, Phoenix. That's what makes them different. In Gilbert, I don't have to work half as hard to convince parents to put in their applications for ESAs. But in Alhambra, we do a lot of hand-holding. But one thing I can tell you that I have fallen in love with the parents in Alhambra is their genuine love for a better education for their children. They all hunger and thirst for a better educational system for their children. And right now, I look into their eyes, they see Great Hearts Christos as a fountain of hope for their children. They want to be able to go out in the morning for their daily bread, work hard, leave their children at a school where they know that they are being educated intellectually, morally, and spiritually. And many of them know exactly what they're looking for. Now, how to get the ESAs is a bit more challenging in Alhambra because some of these parents, they're not computer literates. But you know Great Hearts. When Great Hearts sets out to do something, they go all out. That's what defines Great Hearts. Everybody that works for Great Hearts truly is a servant in our network. And so we have lots of people devoting themselves to holding the hands of the parents and helping them put in those applications. And so far, it's been really good, that support system.
I love that. So 2 questions. One, what is the one, going back a little bit, I'd love to have you answer the why. Like, why did Great Hearts decide this was the time to open a private model rather than just staying the course with charters?
I mean, if you know Great Hearts very well, before they get into anything, there's a feasibility study.
Yeah, right.
And you and I know, I mean, everybody in here, you know that there isn't a better time to start a Christian private school than now. that every citizen of this state has access to $7,000 in the ESA scholarship money from the state. We also have STOs, not just the ESAs. I mean, we have students who can come to our school for exactly $0 if they go through the STO route, where they can kind of grab some money here, another there, and they're able to pay the $9,700 school fees. But going back to the why, there is availability of money for parents to access to be able to afford these schools. No matter how gracious Great Hearts is, you need money to run schools, and that's the truth.
Yeah, I love that. So Toyin mentioned this a little bit, or alluded to, and it was talked about earlier at the earlier panel, and Nicole, you kind of touched on this too, and I would love for both you and Matt to dig into just the process based on what you've observed. Whitney Marsh is in here, and she was a senior leader at the Arizona Department of Education and is intricately involved in the administration of the program. One, how do you, from your perspectives, how do you ensure that customer experience? Because right from the get-go, if you have a user interface when moms and dads and caregivers and guardians go on that website and it is difficult and hard, you potentially lost a customer who potentially could be your greatest evangelist for the program. So based on your perspectives, particularly for the many states that are about to implement these, I would be interested, actually, frankly, all three of you, I'd be interested to hear from you. What would be a great characteristic of a platform that engages parents in a friendly customer service way, but also maintains perhaps the guardrails of fiscal stewardship? This is taxpayer dollars. So any three of you could go.
Sure, I'll jump in on that. I mean, I think it is a struggle to try and make sure things run smoothly. And I think in Arizona, again, we've seen some bumps there. I think in terms of a platform or a provider for all of these states, I think the most important thing is its primary focus the user experience of the parents, right? Is it something that's going to make sure that a parent, as you said, right, that getting the families signed up, they may not be super technologically literate, but they still need to get through that process so that they're able to get that financial support and be able to get through it. And so navigating that, making it so it's not something that, filling out the FAFSA or some of these things for higher education, right? We've seen these models where you can have a college degree, a master's, you can have be a rocket scientist, and it takes 6 weeks to try and figure out how to fill out some of these forms, right? That's not a model that actually opens this up to be usable. And so I think as these states are coming on board and looking at this, it's making sure that is this something that a family can, maybe with some help, but hopefully just on their own, can navigate this process. It's very straightforward. They're going to know that their application goes through. They're going to know that once they're on the program, it's very clear what they can purchase, and that they're going to know, okay, did I make this purchase and now it's okay, right? To not have kind of questions hanging over their head. I think there are a lot of questions, and again, we've seen challenges here in Arizona, and as other states are starting to work with that. But again, this is a program that first in the nation to be universal, right? There are going to be some of these difficulties, and I think that other states can learn from and say, hey, we saw maybe some missteps here in Arizona or some areas where we can help improve this. But I think at the end of the day, it's making sure that the ESA program is there to serve students, and obviously follow the law, but to be making sure that experience for parents and for students is as user-friendly as possible.
I love that.
So I think if you think about Arizona's experience, it's important to keep in mind in places like, Arkansas, Iowa, South Carolina that are just learning. The first question has to be who's going to administer the program and how. Mm-hmm. So what are the goals of the program? And what you want the administrator to do. And remember, some of these states don't even know the first question. Mm-hmm. Like, they don't think, oh, yeah, I've got to go find a platform. I mean, they're just like, we got some money, and we have to figure out how to get it to the kids. And so that question, like asking that first question, I think it's really important to very clearly articulate what you want if you're going to, hopefully most of these states will have some kind of a vendor, outside vendor, to make those connections between the provider and the parent, to make clear what the goals of the program are. Is it really ambitious, very pluralistic, 1,000 flowers bloom? And if so, then how do you decide what's a flower and what's weed? And how aggressive are you going to be about trying to pull the weeds up without, hurting the flowers? My view is, I worry that a few bad decisions will force states to put like the accountability cart before the horse, and we'll be like chasing off parents because of fears of a few misspending decisions, when instead we could really use an audit at the background. I do think the ESAs, one of the things about innovating in ESAs, in the report that I'm writing with Mike McShane, we talked to a lot of people involved in them. One of the real concerns that people have expressed is there really aren't enough, there's not enough players in that platform space. There's not enough players of really high quality, innovative ed tech, fintech stuff that can make these programs actually work, provide answers quickly, match pay providers, those kinds of things. I personally, I'm kind of proud that one of my former research assistants is running one of them now, and he's a great success story, and I'm sure it's all me. But but I don't think there's enough, and I think that that's something that like the philanthropy world and the like venture capital world needs to think about. We're gonna have a lot of money that needs to change hands, and we really need more innovation to make these programs work. Because again, unlike vouchers, you really can't run these things without a private provider to do that matchmaking.
Right. And Toyin, I want to ask on the supply side, and sort of as you are going to be a user on the other side. So I'm really curious, like, why? Like, you're going to enter in and you're going to be like, okay, are we going to get paid in 30 days? Are we going to get paid in 60 days? Or is it going to be on a quarterly disbursement? In Arizona anyway, our families, they get quarterly disbursements in their accounts. So, like, how are you guys going to navigate those waters? Knowing that, at least if you watch our State Board of Education hearings, there's some concern about the district, when funds actually make it into accounts. So how are you guys thinking about that?
I mean, passion is something that drives Great Hearts. We're a group of people that are passionately committed to educating children. We have a servant's heart, and we always work as a team. We do envisage that, we don't know what's going to happen regarding disbursement of this money. We're not even thinking that far yet. We're looking at Alhambra, where despite the fact that parents know they have access to $7,000, the ESA, I still look into the eyes of those parents, and some of them are saying, but we can't afford the $2,700 left. And we're going back to our drawing boards as a team saying, wait a minute, we didn't envisage that community, there will be parents that can afford the remaining $2,700 for the school fees. And so the team goes back and we look at each other and say, okay, we're not going to give up now. We need to raise funds for them. And we finally found a donor that said the first 100 parents to sign up for their ESA at Alhambra, they will pay what is left of the $9,700 tuition.
Amazing.
That's right. And so it goes back to your question about how are we going to be a good customer? We're going to be a good customer by keeping that passion, that flame burning. It's about fighting for the souls of our children. This is a moral obligation for Great Hearts. We're not for-profit private school. We're not in this to make money. We're just in this to create more opportunities for children all over the valley. And if you're not aware, all our schools have wait lists. I have about 500 students on the wait list of the school I am transitioning out of. It means that despite Great Hearts having 24 schools in the valley, it's still not enough to provide this beautiful education for the children of this country, this state that deserve it. And we have people moving from out of state just because they've heard about Great Hearts and they want their children to be a part of this. And so, back to your question, we know that there are many hurdles ahead, and we're just taking it one hurdle at a time. We hope when school starts, those disbursements for the first quarter will yeah, but there's no stopping Great Hearts, just so you know. I looked at Dan Scogging, our co-founder, one day. We were hustling, brainstorming, and we were both on our way home, and I stopped and I looked at Dan. I said, you've been doing this for 20 years. Are you not tired? Oh, he said, no, Toyin. It's about fighting for the souls of our children. He said, I have no plans to retire, just so you know, Twain. I'm going to do this. I'll scale back as I get older, but I'm going to do this until I go to my grave. And that's who we are. That's what it means to be great hearts. So we're not looking at how big the problem is. We hold hands as a team, and we keep forging ahead, one day at a time.
And if you don't get disbursements, you'll be calling ADE
That's right.
constantly,
We
waiting
have a whole
to get
team.
through.
We'll have a whole team ready to do that work. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really fantastic. Question, we didn't really touch on it, but on the issues of fraud, that some individuals have sort of looked to Arizona like, oh, these instances. I think Goldwater, you did a report a few years ago based on, I think, the 2020 audit, maybe. My years might be a little off. And it was less than 1% of, quote, fraud. Sometimes it was mistaken payments. Tell us a little bit more about that, and how can we, as we listen to these stories, like how can we say, oh my gosh, you're just gonna raid all these dollars and steal it from the taxpayer and spend it at crazy, establishments. Help us understand what is the fraud, and perhaps how does that compare with our traditional public system?
Yeah, and I will say one is larger than the other, and you can. It's not hard to guess which. So yeah, as you mentioned, the state, there's a state auditor general, right, who's sort of the state watchdog, and they look at public school districts. They issue reports all the time and say, hey, we found an instance of misuse and misspending and fraud. They also look at the ESA program. They did a report several years ago, and they said, hey, we identified, and it was a number of transactions and dollars that had been spent at unauthorized merchants with families who were using the debit cards. And so they had these debit cards, they can go swipe it, it's supposed to be used at a vendor that's providing an educational service, and the state auditor general found and said, well, we're finding transactions where they're being used where they're not supposed to. And so we had the left take this and have a field day and say, look at this program, it's full of fraud and misspending, look at these terrible parents, they're out there trying to scam everybody. Well, it turns out that not only the next year, when the Auditor General came back after the department had made some changes to the way they ran things, they found one transaction at an unauthorized merchant. The total, I think, $30 is what it was. So essentially, the auditors themselves said the issues with the debit cards have been resolved, right? That story never got any coverage in the media, right? The media had trumpeted it to all over the walls the year before, and then when it came out and said, oh, it's not a problem anymore, did we have a celebration? Did we have fireworks? No, we just had, let's look for the next thing that we can try and attack parents and school choice on. It also came out that the department, which was run by Kathy Hoffman at the time, those same auditors looked at how was the experience for parents. And parents who were calling into the department with questions to say, hey, can I use my ESA account to buy this or buy that? 1/4 of the calls that parents made to the department, they were getting bad information from the department. So if you're a parent and you're calling the helpline and saying, hey, can I buy this? And the person on the line says, yeah, maybe, yes or no, and then it turns out they were wrong, is that fraud? Is that misspending? Or is that a parent who's trying desperately to navigate the system and getting bad information, right? So we saw this, and again, none of that got reported in the mainstream media because they want to run cover for the teachers' unions. But at the end of the day, it's fundamentally a difference of opinion, right? Those of us who support school choice believe that parents are the best judge of their students' success, and they are the parents who care most about their kids. To the left, parents are a nefarious group who needs to be viewed as a potential villain or fraud, right? We've seen the groups come out and call parent groups akin to domestic terrorism, right? Some of this just extreme inflammatory language. Yes, there are going to be parents in any setting who there are going to be cases where you need to make sure that there is compliance with things. But at the end of the day, parents are the good guys, right? And the left and the teachers' unions want to say, well, you don't have all the paper credentials, you don't go through all of our certification. We had someone testify at the Arizona legislature this session and say, what do parents have? They don't have the same fancy degrees that we do, right? There's this distrust, there's this condescending view of parents that I think just is indicative of how they look at it. And so something like the ESA program, the misspending and the fraud there is far less than you see in other government programs, even in education programs, but it's something that's not a narrative that that the left is interested in admitting.
I just want to say I'd like to ask any sane person would ask the following question: would you trade a minuscule risk of a couple of misspending decisions and maybe even some bad actors for the possibility of these kids to not be able to go to her school? That's what's at stake. Mm-hmm. Like sure, there will be some bad actors, there will be some mistakes, but hopefully there's a lot more of people who are out there to transform the lives of children because they love them and because they believe that they're formed in the image and likeness of a loving God, and it is our obligation to bring them to their full God-given potential. And if there's a few $1,000s spent on trampolines in SeaWorld, I think that is a risk we're taking.
On that note, though, our local public schools can spend dollars on trampolines and SeaWorld adventures. So one could make the case that they're comparable expenditures, just different scale, perhaps.
There's a funny story I heard by this guy, Shavar Jeffries. He used to be he is, I think, still the president of Democrats for Education.
No, anyway, he's now the head of KIPP Foundation.
Okay.
KIPP Charter
He started
Schools.
a charter school that was located in a Newark public school, and the public schools they had air conditioning, and the public school, the traditional public school, didn't have air conditioning, so they complained, and so Shavar was like, okay, fine, I'll buy some air conditioners. And the teachers union said, oh no, you can't. And the union said, you can't go to Home Depot and buy air conditioners. That's not allowed. The unions have to buy the air conditioners. They'll cost 5 times more than the Home Depot air conditioners. And meanwhile, we're gonna have to get the unionized contractors to install the air conditioners. And the way he tells the story is by the time they got around to paying extra for the air conditioners and getting them installed, it was December. And nobody needed the air conditioners in Newark anymore. And so there's waste in public schools.
I love that. In a few minutes, I'm going to open up the questions to all of you, but I did want to ask you all, Governor Ducey, and I think it was you, Matt, as well, kind of alluded to, well, actually you did earlier in our panel, talking about the sophistication of the opponents. That are like, oh, we're against the program, but now we're for only these students to be in the ESA. What gives you all hope and excitement about this program and the opportunity for the nearly 1.1 million kids in Arizona that now have this option?
I'll go first. Personally, that's one thing I've learned from Great Hearts. We don't dwell on politics. We go right ahead and we solve problems, we educate children. What statistics saying about mental health of our children in this country? That's what I am concerned about. I really don't care about politics, what's happening on the left or right. What I care about is that I was just reading in Washington Post about a month ago that girlhood is in crisis in this country. 1 in 3 girls have been sexually assaulted. Our kids are dying of drug overdose. There's anxiety, mood swings, depression. The suicide rate in this country is increasing. That's what I am concerned about. And what gives me hope is that schools like Great Hearts were committed to the hearts and the minds of those children. When we create an environment where the right people are put in front of our children, the right content. Great Hearts, we have a review board that reviews every literature that is read in every classroom. The content has to edify our children. And the third thing that we create in that beautiful environment you all see is habits of excellence, because we understand that children don't turn out to be good human beings when they attend motivational speeches in college. It begins with the habits instilled in them from their days that they're impressionable when they can take it all in. Plato said the beginning is the most important part in the life of a tender thing, when the impressions are readily taken. Aristotle said we are what we repeatedly do. So the content, the people, and the habits that we create in that environment called Great Hearts is what makes us stand out. And we stand out. We're the top performing charter school in this country. In this state. And I'm sure in the country too. Eric Twist will tell you that. Our former president, Eric Twist, will tell you, Twain, I have no doubt we're the top performing school in the country. Having said all of that, that is the environment that our children deserve. Whether it's a charter school or a Christian private school, whenever you see the name Great Hearts, make sure your children and your grandchildren run in, because that's where lies the fountain of hope for this generation. And I have no doubt about it.
That's beautiful. Nicole?
How can we not hope? Arizona has proved the impossible is possible. Some people say we wouldn't have been having this conversation 10 years ago. We wouldn't have had this conversation 10 months ago. I mean, we have moved from no states with universal school choice to, I don't know, depending how you count, 7 or 8. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of hiccups, but there's, that is an incredible thing. And I think Milton Friedman said that he actually predicted one state will eventually adopt universal choice, and then there will be no stopping it. So there will be hiccups, there'll be rollbacks. Some of these states are going to get challenges and referenda, but there is hope because parents have decided that they've had enough, and they want control of their children's future. And I have hope because I heard from you today. And I want to tell one final story that gave me great hope recently, and I kind of get choked up every time I tell the story. I recently gave a talk at Pat Wolf's shop down in Arkansas at the University of Arkansas Department of Education Reform about implementing ESAs, and the young man came up to me afterwards and he said, "Oh, my name is Daniels, and I'm from Indianapolis." It was a young African-American man, and he said, "I was one of the first kids in Indiana to get a voucher. And I was a single mom, and that voucher allowed me to go to Cardinal Ritter High School. It wasn't the best high school in Indy, but it was a good high school. And because I got that voucher, I went to college. And now I'm here, and what I want to do with my life is study the effects of private school choice and parental choice on families like mine, because I know how transformational it was in my own life. And that gives me hope, because he's not the only Dayon Daniels."
Amazing. Matt?
I don't think I can top what either of them said. I'll just say, hope is sitting just to the right of me, among many other reasons.
I love it. All right, Pat, do we have any questions? We have a gentleman right here in the middle.
First of all, thank you all.
And a question. Always ask a question, not a comment.
My name is Peter Redwine. I'm the president of the school board at Logos Christian Academy in Casa Grande, and we're also Christian classical education. I'd like to speak with you afterwards, Doctor, if you have some time. Matt, my question is there plans to allow STOs like ACSTO to be used in conjunction with ESA for schools that cost more than the $7,000? Because I know a lot of our kids, we're adding 9th grade this year and hopefully the rest of high school in the next 2 years or so. But a lot of our students funnel up to Valley Christian, which is $15,000 a year. So a lot of parents would like that option, but their kids end up in Casa Grande Public High School, which honestly is not a great environment. Thank you.
Matt, do you want to answer it, or do you want me to?
So I can say that the way that the statute is currently being applied is to say that you have to do one or the other. And so I know a lot of, as you guys have said, you're looking at ways. What are ways to top that up? What are ways to provide options for families? And I think that as you said, you have families who maybe now are able to, with the ESA program, get through those grades, and then they run into a cliff in some of these circumstances. And I think that's further evidence, right? The folks on the other side say this isn't helpful, right? You're seeing families who want to continue, and it is that financial burden that the ESA program helps close. But without that, or even sometimes even with it, right, that burden is on those families. And so I think that that's the way that it's being interpreted, right now. And I think your guys' experience with finding a way to top that up is an extraordinary tale of success.
It would have to go back to the legislature. Any other questions, Shirley? Right here in the middle.
Bit of a rhetorical question, but with the growth of ESAs, does that mean we never again need to discuss that dreaded word, vouchers?
So nationwide, I think that my prediction politically is that most states that do not have voucher programs will not adopt them. They will probably move toward an ESA model. I do think ESAs are much harder to implement because the scholarship vouchers are easy. You show up, the state finds out the kid's there, and they send the check. It's very easy to implement. In states like Indiana, where I live, and Ohio and North Carolina, where they already have substantial voucher programs, I think a move toward universal, which has just happened in Indiana, is just going to be removing all the caps on the voucher. That doesn't help all families. That just puts kids in private schools But so yeah, I guess I would guess, and that probably not a lot of states will be adopting large new voucher programs, but states that have them will probably expand them.
There's also, I will say that there's a misnomer. If you read the Arizona Capital Times, they conflate the terms, and there's a legal definition. I don't know it, so maybe Nicole or Matt, you can sort of clarify. But often individuals will say they're the same thing, but they are different.
Yeah, I mean, there is, and you bring up a good point here, which is they feel like, well, throwing the label voucher on it makes it sound worse or more unpopular. And so we have the ESA program, we have the tax credit scholarship program. The left will say STO vouchers or ESA vouchers. They don't care what it is. They don't care that there's actually a separate, technically different logistical program. As you said, right, it's not just handing a check to a school, which is a voucher. They're not concerned about that. So there are states with legacy voucher programs that don't give that same flexibility. I think the left is more about branding than they are about substance. And there is an actual voucher program where the public schools pay private schools for students that they don't want to or don't feel that they can support with special education. And you don't hear the left say anything about that, right? And so there are examples here. We're going to be putting out some content on this as well, where, again, it's all about labels and euphemisms and branding for them as opposed to the substance of it, because they don't want to get into arguing, well, why is this student over here who could use funding, we should fund them even more if they walk into a public school, but the moment they walk into an ESA program, they're just a burden on the state, and we should cast them aside.
How about another question? Right over here. My left, y'all's right.
How can you make it easier for creative individuals to become an educational entrepreneur and create a new solution for the unique parents and families that we have here in Arizona?
I see two entrepreneurs here that maybe you can connect with afterwards who have provided some services, so I'm sure they can reach out to you afterwards. But I know there's some groups who are trying to make sure that folks who want to go into teaching or tutoring or set up a shop can actually get connected with this and get that off the ground, because I think that being an entrepreneurial educator is something that maybe is scary to a lot of folks, but there's so much opportunity now to spread your wings and move outside the traditional system.
I also think it's really important to inform parents that entrepreneurial opportunities are available to them, and so I think most parents, there's some evidence that many parents don't know that as their state even has private school choice. Some of them don't know what charter schools are. They don't know they have options out of the traditional public schools, and that's probably true in Arizona too. And so they certainly don't know what a micro school is or a learning pod, right? So that customizing education is hard, and telling parents, I mean, some of you, and this is what you do, but telling parents about these different opportunities is really critical. I mean, I always joke, my husband and I are both law professors, and I don't know, I mean, the idea of customizing our kids' education sounds really daunting to me. And so I think informing people that these are options and showing them models is just the beginning, but it is an important beginning.
My understanding is that before Governor Ducey left, he had created a task force that its purpose is to educate people about the opportunities through school choice. Did that ever happen?
There's various, like through the Arizona Department or Arizona State Board of Education, we have a few individuals whose job is to help educate moms and dads and guardians about all their different options. And so they are doing strategic outreach. There was also some effort, I think, in this last legislative session where I think Arizona Department of Education is going to be tasked with some additional engagement with families, particularly, I think, in underperforming schools. I think that's right.
There's several elements that to try and, because obviously step one is make it so that you have the option to do this, either to send your kids there or to be an educator there, and step two is to inform people about it. And I think there are several initiatives that are trying to do that. And obviously it's a pretty big lift, but there's a lot of opportunity there.
Gentleman over here.
I have a question about money. It's a dovetail on that. Short version, I'm from Tucson, disgruntled dad, been fighting with the school systems down there, public, for my kids, finally gave up, decided, you know what, we gotta just pull the kids out. I have a church that has 2 locations, not my church, a church I was put in contact with. We have 2 locations, we have space for probably 180 kids. I've got some startup costs. I'm wondering if there's some kind of a fund, any kind of a money pool, I appreciate Great Hearts has some donors. I don't. Is there some kind of a funding mechanism that you all know about that would help someone like me or perhaps you that could entrepreneurially start some of these micro schools or whatever you want to call them? Obviously, the state money is there. It's just going to take a while to get there. Any thoughts on that would be helpful.
There's a couple things. My colleagues and I at the organization that I'm a part of, we're helping to launch sort of these types of funds, but not actually here. So I'm sorry we're not doing that here. Perhaps we can work on that. But there are organizations that you could compete for grants. So there's something called the VELA Education Fund. They tend to be focused on smaller school sizes. If you can Google VELA, V-E-L-A, Education Fund, they tend to be smaller startup grants, so maybe $10,000, $30,000, $50,000. But if you were really trying to retrofit or buy those initial supplies, those can be very helpful. There's also something called the YASS Prize, Y-A-S-S, that individuals in the state of Arizona have won grants from that, and that has been very, very helpful. And then I think another strategy is just like tell everyone and say, help us.
I think we can learn from our charter school friends about venture philanthropy and accelerators. One of the reasons that charter schools took off and did so well were programs like the New Schools Venture Fund and Charter School Growth Fund, and we haven't really had that in the private school space yet.
Not yet.
And I think there's a lot of philanthropic space that could be filled with people who are trying to help innovators like you, but it's not there yet, at least not in a really organized way.
There is an organization called the Drexel Fund. They have not invested significantly here in the state of Arizona. Perhaps now with ESA they will, or our universal ESA, they're always concerned about long-term sustainability of a school. Our $7,000 average is something they feel like is a little too low, but perhaps that will change over time. But from the startup perspective, perhaps we can brainstorm together. Any other questions? We've got two right here. We'll go middle and then we'll go aisle.
I wonder if you could address a little bit about the quality of education. I'm assuming the quality of education with the ESA program, charter school, et cetera, would be higher than the public schools. Could you talk about that and how much difference? And the second question, are we publicizing that and getting that in the media?
I guess I would say, just to keep in mind from, I went to public schools and they served me well. Public schools, many excellent public schools serve kids well. Many excellent private schools serve kids well, but no two kids are alike. And one of the great gifts of an education savings account program is it gives parents the opportunity to choose schools. They might choose a public school for one child that's being served well, but a homeschooling situation for another, or a religious school for another. So I always think it's important not to try too hard to prove the case that private schools are better. They're just better in some cases. And I think, and we talked about at the very beginning, one thing that if you look at the test scores studies of voucher programs throughout the years, what you'll see is marginal gains from participation in standardized test scores, but life outcomes, just the changes are amazing. If you participated in the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program, for example, you're more likely to graduate from high school, go to college, stay in college, get married, get employed, stay employed, and stay out of prison. And if you looked at the test scores, you would have like a point higher than the public schools, or, 3 points. So like, you just have to be really, I actually have always thought we could do a better job of talking about these quality issues and finding other ways to measure quality and describe quality other than just that blunt instrument of a standardized test.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the definition of quality for us at Great Hearts is the well-roundedness of the education. That disciplined study in the liberal arts. Our children They learn math, English language arts, history, science, but they also learn the special area subjects like music, art, PE, Latin, Spanish, French, depending on the school. And when they go on to high school, some of them learn German, they learn Greek, they do all the science, they do everything. I think that is a greater marker of the excellence of a school and not necessarily test scores. Because test scores to me is utilitarian. Whereas most classical schools that you see are more focused on raising that well-rounded child. And the definition of rigor for us is not excessive homework. Is knowing that a child comes from a home where he or she has heard all her life that they're not great singers. And they show up at a Great Heart School, they're singing. Or a child that your dad has told you, well, we don't have artists in our home. It's just not a gift given to us by God. And they show up at a Great Heart School, and they're drawing beautiful things, right? That's how we measure excellence at our school, a well-rounded child.
We'll do our last question right here.
Matt, you and I have discussed this, but maybe for the benefit of the audience, could you maybe talk about how the Arizona ESA program, or the legislation specifically, protects traditional homeschool students, and how other states that are confronting opposition from kind of a subset of established homeschool parents can address that head on and make sure that those parents are comfortable and not feeling threatened with additional strings attached or some of the options available for them.
Sure. Yeah, one of the big questions with something like an ESA program or school choice is to say, okay, we're giving these parents this option, but now are we going to put a bunch of strings? Are we going to bring tentacles? Are we going to make Great Hearts or a private school or any of these others that are there suddenly just look like a carbon copy of your traditional district school and regulate them into just oblivion? And I think there are a lot of homeschool families who have said, look, I just don't have confidence in the existing traditional public school system. I just want to be left alone. And so there are a lot of families who look at this and say, well, the ESA sounds nice, but if I'm getting funding for this, then there's going to be strings, and I don't want that, right? So a lot of homeschool families have, I think, very reasonably said, I'm just a little hesitant about a program like this because I'm always concerned about the camel's nose under the tent and somebody now using this to exploit it. So the ESA program in Arizona actually was set up in a way that says we're not going to undermine the existing homeschool setup in any way. So the ESA program is a little technical, but it's actually a legally separate category from a homeschool student. So if you want to just say, I'm a homeschooler, I don't want to go anywhere near this program, you just continue doing the exact same thing. If you want to say, hey, look, I'm comfortable signing the contract that says I'm going to get $7,000, and those funds can be used for these purposes, then you can go ahead and do that. And so the program is set up so that there is always that backstop of the existing homeschool arrangement that is separate from the ESA program. And the legislation that's there is very clear. It says this does not give the state any authority to boss parents or private schools around in terms of what curriculum they use or the creed that they're going to be abiding by, right? So there's a lot of stuff there that I think is very clear to say this is a program that is about returning some of the funding that taxpayers, because homeschool families or private school families without school choice pay their state taxes, they're paying federal taxes, they're paying into the pots of money, but then they never see any of it back. And the ESA program, returns some of that and says, we're not going to disadvantage your family because you happen to choose this private option here or Great Hearts Christos, as opposed to going to Tucson Unified or Phoenix Elementary or whatever the case may be.
I think a lot of the state new ESA programs have similar language that say basically we're just making it super clear that this does not give us the state additional regulatory authority, and they may not infringe on the religious ethos of the school, the autonomy of the school, except, it always says something like except to the extent necessary, which, whatever that means. But I also think that it's really important, especially for schools, when they begin to participate, to be they need good lawyers. They need really good parent handbooks, student handbooks, employee handbooks that make quite clear the expectations of the kids, the parents, the teachers, when they participate, because that will not only give them comfort and let the parents know what they're getting themselves into, but it also will provide legal protection in the event of a lawsuit, that they get the ministerial exception and other things. So a lot of these things will be litigated, and they are already being litigated, but I think those kinds of proactive steps to help the schools get really organized in advance is really important as well.
Love that. So my last question for all of you before we close and let you all go enjoy some more libations and other food nibbles is Governor Ducey alluded that last year opponents of the ESA expansion tried to get it on the ballot, and there was some question whether or not it would make it for the 2022 ballot or if it was intended for the 2024. The opponents got half the signatures, I think, that they needed to even get on the ballot, and that was without signature checks. My question to you all, what should this group of individuals do as citizens who are engaged and curious to do to help protect and expand the program between now and 2024 and any time thereafter?
I'll jump in, I guess, again. You know, there's several things that you can do, right? It's getting involved in it. So if you have kids or families that you know in your circles to participate in these programs, right? The more that students are taking part of this, the stronger that becomes. And also, yes, there is a concerted effort. The teachers' unions are very well organized. They can whip signatures, even though they weren't able to count how many they had last time and came up short. They're very organized and they're very dedicated to opposing these kinds of programs. And parents, we are concerned about our kids, right? We're not there to go do protests and walkouts and all that stuff that they tend to do. We're concerned with our families and our communities, and so I think it's making sure that you are getting engaged and you are recognizing that it is important to spread the word, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to others in your community to say, here's what this program is, here's why it's important. Yeah, you're going to hear some stuff from the other side. Tune it out. Here's the truth. Here's how it makes a difference in kids' lives.
Toyin or Nicole?
I agree. Be ambassadors of the revolution. Speak it wherever you find people. Don't underestimate the knowledge you now have about this. Every opportunity you have in church, you meet someone at the farmer's market, say something to someone. That's how we're going to expand this. And every person you speak to about school choice, it matters. It's one at a time. Yeah. Tiny drops of water is what makes the mighty ocean.
I love that. That's beautiful.
I like the line, be ambassadors of the revolution.
That's right.
In large ways and small. You mentioned getting kids signed up, helping, if you're a lawyer, helping with the parent and the parental and the employee handbooks, recruiting families, putting people at ease when they're concerned about regulation. All of these things really matter, and I do agree completely with Matt. The more kids on the programs, the more it's impossible to take it away. And the more lives that are being transformed, and that's also quite important.
Exactly. So I just would like to thank Ray and Pat Burke with Manhattan Institute for creating this opportunity, and Governor Ducey, Ray and Matt for facilitating the last panel, and Nicole and Toyin and Matt, thank you so much for just sharing your insight with all of us and charging with all of us to be sort of warriors for this, this movement. Thank you so much.
Thank you.